Hi, friends. Welcome to Testify. So, today we're going to take a look at the book of First Samuel as part of Bible story. So, let's begin. So, the story actually begins with the introduction of three main characters, and that is Samuel, Saul, and David. Now, these are three important leaders whose actions would transition Israel from being ruled by a group of judges, as we saw in the previous book of Judges, into a kingdom ruled by kings. Chapters 1 to 7. The story begins with a woman named Anna, who is deeply grieved because she has never been able to have children. And we see her time and time again visiting the temple at Shiloh and praying fervently to God to give her a child and promising him that she would dedicate this child to his service. And by the grace of God, she finally has a son called Samuel, and he grows up to be a prophet. So we see that coming to pass. Hannah's son Samuel grows up in the temple as a great prophet under the training and supervision of Eli. Now, who was Eli? Eli was a judge and a high priest for 40 years in Israel. And he was based in the temple at Shiloh, and he trained many prophets. However, Eli could not train his two sons, who were priests in the church, but they were absolute scoundrels. Now, these guys used to steal money from the church, and they would also indulge in sexual immorality. So, after Samuel was called, God reveals to Samuel how Eli's sons would die in battle because of their disobedience. And we see in an important battle against the Philistines, the Israelites become extremely arrogant, and rather than praying, they bring out the Ark of the Covenant as a trophy that will grant them victory in battle. Now, as we discussed in, I think it was the book of Joshua, the Ark of the Covenant is a symbolism of the presence of God. Right? So, because of this pride, God allows Israel to lose the battle, and the Ark of the Covenant is stolen by the Philistines. And it is this very same battle that the sons of Eli are actually killed. And it's amazing that Eli learns of his two sons being killed. But however, when he hears that the Ark of the Covenant has been captured by the Philistines, that shock causes him to fall to his death. And the Philistines take the ark and place it into their temple with their god Dagon. And the following morning, the Philistines find their idol god in pieces in their temple. Now, that to us is not something which is um, shocking, because we know that the living God is way more powerful than any idol. So the God of Israel responds by defeating the Philistines and their idols without an army, by sending plagues on them. So they continuously start getting plagues, afflicting them. And as a result, the Philistines become fear struck, and they send the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel. These guys obviously know that because they have stolen the Ark of the Covenant, they are now being afflicted by all of these plagues. So the point is also very clear: God is not Israel's trophy, and he opposes pride, whether it is amongst the Israelites or the Philistines. So Israel is now called yet again to remain humble and obedient if they want to experience God's covenant blessing. And this is time and time again brought to them, but they still decide to embark on their own journeys. So, from chapter 8 to 31, the Israelites then go to Samuel and demand a king. just like the other nations. So Israel yet again wants to reject God's rule and desire the rule of a man instead. They desire to live like the surrounding nations. So Samuel is rightfully angry at this, and he consults with God, and God responds by saying, though their motives are wrong, if it is a king they want, it will be a king that they get. And yet again, God is extremely faithful to his people. From here, we are introduced to Saul, and we all know this is not the Saul who wrote the 14 epistles in the New Testament. This is the Saul from the Old Testament who becomes king. And this is basically the people's choice. So Samuel confronts both Saul and Israel, and he warns the people that they would only benefit from a king who was humble and faithful to God, or else the king would bring ruin, which we later on see on account of Saul. So Saul becomes king, who at first seems okay, but then Saul starts spiraling downhill. And if you look at some of the things that he did, firstly, God instructed Saul to utterly destroy the Amalekites in battle and all their possessions. However, Saul decided to spare King Agag and the best of the livestock, claiming it was for sacrifice. The second thing that he did at Gilgal, Saul felt pressured by his troops, and he was waiting on Samuel to offer the burnt offering. However, he panicked and he offered the burnt offering himself rather than waiting for Samuel to perform the ritual, which was disobedience to God's instruction again. And finally, Saul consults with the medium to speak with Prophet Samuel. So after Samuel dies, Saul goes to a medium and asks the medium to bring up the spirit of Samuel. Now, this is a direct violation of the laws of Israel, and it demonstrates their departure from God's guidance, not only to Israel, for us as well as believers. We are not supposed to consult with mediums, consult with witch doctors, spirits, new age, going to places that delve with evil spirits. And if we look at the first commandment, we are only to worship the Lord our God and no one else. So God works behind the scenes to raise up this new king. And he is an insignificant shepherd boy named David. And when we look at a king, we normally associate a king with being well clad, and also very intelligent, well spoken. But David was just a shepherd boy. And he was 16 when he was first anointed. So Samuel then turns to Saul and warns him that God is going to raise up a new king to replace him because of his great disobedience. We then see Saul descending into madness while David rises to power. And in a battle which we all have heard of against the Philistines, David defeats the giant Goliath with just one stone and a sling. Now we know that David is not acting alone. David knows that his God is fighting the battle for him. And we know that God supports him, and hence he wins these battles because he puts his faith in God himself. So David works for Saul as a general, winning all his battles and gaining all the fame. At first, Saul finds favor with David. However, he quickly becomes jealous and starts hunting David down in order to kill him. And David, however, has done nothing wrong, and he simply runs away and awaits. Now, we find David in this book constantly going into hiding and running from Saul, because Saul is definitely out to kill David. Now, despite multiple opportunities to kill Saul because of Saul's evil, David chooses not to do it. He chooses not to kill Saul because Saul is God's anointed. And later on, we see that Saul and his three sons die on Mount Gilboa during a battle against the Philistines, one of them being Jonathan, who is David's very close friend. So we see also in the book that Jonathan always gives David the heads up before something is going to happen. So he loves David. He is David's very good friend. So he dies with his father Saul and two of the other brothers in battle against the Philistines. So Saul falls onto his own sword and is wounded by the Philistine archers, and he then dies. His armor bearer also dies by his own sword. And after Saul dies, we find that David and Samuel go into very deep mourning. Now, David is such a faithful and wonderful person that he even mourns the man that was after him to kill him. But God asks Samuel to stop mourning Saul and to anoint David in Bethlehem. So we see that David was anointed three times. First, he was anointed in Bethlehem. Now, this is at the house of Jesse, his father. So Samuel visits the house and he asks for all his sons. However, none of the sons that came forth was the anointed or the appointed one. And lastly, they bring David, the dirty shepherd boy, and that was the anointed and the appointed one. So that was the very first time. The second time was in Hebron as king over the tribe of Judah. Now that's very significant because Jesus actually comes from the seed of David. And Jesus is also known as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And thirdly, we see David being appointed or anointed, in Hebron as king of Israel. So that's very, very important, as David was anointed by God. So what can we take away from this book, and what message does it actually brings us? Firstly, God answers prayer. No prayer goes unanswered. And we find many of us tend to think our prayers go unanswered, but we don't understand that something that is not in God's plan or God's will for us will not come to pass. God can see in the future, which we cannot see. So he's not going to give us something that's going to harm us. So when Anna told God that if he gave her a son, he will be used for his service, we see that Anna was very faithful to God and she kept up that covenant. And so was God very faithful to Anna as well. So God saw that Anna missed Samuel so much because Samuel grew up in the temple. God blessed her with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Again, God is extremely faithful. God also provides Israel with a king because they wanted a king to rule over them. Yet again, he's being faithful. And as a result, they got a king who led them into destruction and ruin. So Saul may have fit the description in physique, but David was a man after God's own heart. Although his appearance was that of a dirty shepherd boy, he was anointed and appointed by God. So God opposes the proud and he always exalts the humble. He is sovereign to raise up kings and appoint rulers. And a very important message this book brings is that obedience is better than sacrifice. We see that in the case of David, who had so many opportunities to kill Saul, but he still respected Saul despite Saul's evil because he was anointed by God. So I hope that this book brings you one step further to understand the book of 1 Samuel. I encourage you to read this book and join us for more on this channel. Stay blessed.